Lately, there's been a lot of talk about demons and things being demonic, and everything is demon this and demon that. And I find it very interesting. And in fact, in March, J.D. Vance was asked about extraterrestrials, UFOs, and extraterrestrials. And his response was, I don't think they're aliens. I think they're demons. So tonight on Thursday Night Live, we're going to be exploring the whole concept of demons, the title being Are Ghosts Demons? Tonight on Thursday Night Live. Hey again. Good evening. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Thursday Night Live. I'm so glad you tuned into the show today. You know, this was not a planned topic, but after I heard that comment from J.D. Vance, it just made me kind of shake my head as to why would people just have this mindset? But it reminded me of a radio show that I did years ago, and it was a ghost show. I mean, that was the guys' things. They were ghost hunters. They had a show about ghosts. And at one point, fairly early, maybe about halfway into the show, one of the moderators said, well, all ghosts are demons. And I responded, so what you're saying is that when you die, you either go to heaven or you go to hell. And anything that you might see on the planet or interact with on the planet are demons? And they said yes. And it kind of left me really a lot speechless, because how do you really have a conversation about ghosts if they're all demons and they're all demons? I don't know. I had nothing. So it became a bit awkward, and I watched the clock for the rest of the night. But if you sit there and explore our world, there are multiple kinds of beings that inhabit our world that are outside of our senses. And they come in all shapes and sizes. You know, so I might refer to them as beings or entities or non-corporeal dead people. I don't know, kind of depends on the story. But I just wanted to talk about some different ones that I've encountered, and talk about their look and feel. So we're all going to be start here. So not all ghosts are stuck in either heaven or in hell. They can travel about. Now, how they move around, I don't know. You know, there's no time space for them. They can be here, they can disappear and go be somewhere else. That's just how they fly. You know, and so when you have those moments where you feel like your mom has come to visit you, you know, and you just feel her presence and maybe smell her perfume. Is it your imagination, or has your mom come to visit? I remember at one point in time, I was moving into a new house with my husband, and we just literally were moving around the corner from one house to a different house. But this house we bought. And so it was very exciting. We gave ourselves like a month to get everything moved, because we were moving a block. And so we would like pack a bunch of boxes and put them in the car and take them to the new house and then unpack them. So at that point in time, the kitchen table was already at the new home location. And I'm unpacking dishes and putting them into cabinets. And I see this man sitting at the kitchen table. And my impression of this man was of my husband's dad, who was dead. Okay. Who was dead. And I was like, hey, if your dad was in the house, would he be sitting at the kitchen table, drinking a cup of coffee, smoking a cigarette? And he's like, well, my dad, because they were rancher cattle people, was always out working on the ranch and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, 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 no. If he was in the house, would he be sitting at the kitchen table, drinking a cup of coffee and smoking a cigarette? And he goes, well, yeah. And I'm like, he's here. Was his dad a demon? I don't think so. I think his dad came because he was very excited for his son in, buying this house and being with us as we were celebrating this moment together. Then, years later, a different husband, because I've been married too many times, was dying. And he had a hospital bed in the living room. And so many of you are familiar with my little poodle with the tinfoil hat. So that's Bitsy, the poodle with the tinfoil hat, the superstar. Anyway, so it was when she was still alive, but she was like not a very ambitious dog. And she slept a lot, even when she was a puppy, and laid around and really didn't do anything. And so usually someone would like come to the door and come in the house, and then she would lift her head and go, oh, somebody's here. I think I need to bark at him. Anyway, so for some weird reason, she would get up like he was there. She would get up and go to the front door and bark 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 and bark, to the point that I was like, look, there's no one there. And I would open the door and then close it. So when this happened the third time, so this is like within 2 days, when this happened the third time, I was like, maybe there's something going on. And I opened the door and I looked, and there were all these people standing outside my door. I mean, obviously invisible, non-corporeal people standing outside my door. So I kind of propped the screen open. I'm like, come on in. And then I looked around my house, and it was kind of jam-packed with people. I mean, obviously non-corporeal, invisible dead people. But were they demons? I don't think so. I believe firmly that they were there to support him in his transition. I mean, it brings me to tears sometimes when I share this story. And so that's one kind of ghost, is that they live wherever they live and they come to visit you. Okay. So these ghosts, obviously they take on human form. Sometimes a ghost, an active ghost, will be connected to a location or to a person. I joke around and I say that they speak human and not Klingon, and I will come back to that concept here in a second. But some ghosts that you encounter so some of these ghosts are earthbound spirits. And so these individuals, they died. And as you saw in the movie Ghost, they never went to the light. They never made that transition to the other side. So they're attached to the earth. Those are the ones that are usually attached to a location and are trapped, usually by their own fears. And many of those can be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Don't know. Not all the time, but many times, because many times they're afraid to transition into the light because they've lived such a bad, evil existence in this lifetime that there's fear about, well, what's going to be there for them on the other side. But that's not it. Ghosts don't only appear in human form. I have encountered alien ghosts, and so they might have, humanoid form, like I interacted with this ghost that I called the devil guy, who was trying to, in essence, this took like 3 sessions to finally get to this. He was trying to get her to commit suicide. which she did confirm. She did attempt twice. But when you get into these alien entities or these alien beings, because if you make the assumption that humanity is the only life form in this universe, then you're not going to have Klingons, you're not going to have Romulans, and you're not going to have Ferengi, you're not going to have any of these guys because there's only human. But if you open that door up that there are other beings, whether they take on corporeal form or whether they are living in a different dimension that are not in what we would perceive as physical form, it kind of opens the door to a whole lot of things. And I'm going to assume that with those beings, that there are some that are not that nice and pretty narcissistic in who they are. But what's interesting is when you try to interact with these beings, and I said before, they don't speak human. And so regardless of where we live on the planet, regardless of the culture we were brought up in, regardless of the language that we speak, there is a humanity about us. We all understand pain. We all understand happiness. If we smile and we project joy, that is recognized universally around the globe. But if you're interacting with an alien species, a non-human species, they don't have the same cues, and we don't have the vocabulary, their vocabulary, to be able to translate their emotional space. And so they can become kind of challenging to interact with, but they are there. Are they demons? I don't think so. I just think that they're non-human beings. Then it gets even more interesting. Then there are the interdimensional beings. Okay, so when I talk about the alien ones, I mean, they're kind of like the other ghosts. They can come and go, as they please. But then there are the interdimensional ones. And these are interesting because whenever you're interacting with an interdimensional being, they always travel through like a vortex. And so I think this story exemplifies this whole concept. So I had a client who was complaining, and I don't really even remember what her original complaint was about. And I'm talking to her, and I see like this, and I'm like, girl, you got all these like dragonfly bug things in your space. And she goes, I know. And I started looking at them, and these little portals would open up on the outside of her auric field, and this bug would fly in and kind of fly around her for a while and fly out. They were driving her crazy because it wasn't just one bug. I mean, thankfully they didn't sting her, but it wasn't just one bug. It was like 2 or 3 bugs at the same time. They were incessant. They didn't stop her. They didn't stop. There was not one vortex. Like, I've worked with a lot of people that they have one vortex, and over time, as they interact with this being, the vortex gets bigger and they reinforce the edges, so it's harder to close the vortex down. Hers were just popping open, boop, 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 boop. And this is me trying to catch the bugs. And so at one point, I kind of like killed all the bugs, and then I stopped doing that, and the bugs all came back. So I really didn't know what to, I didn't know what to do with that. Really didn't know what to do with that. But wait, there's more. Okay, let's see. So let's talk about demons. All right, so I can't read that. So to me, demons are some of the most narcissistic type, and I'm going to say ghosts, that are out there. All they want to do, I mean, if you have an attached entity, and many earthbound spirits, they're mean and nasty, and they want to control and manipulate, period. But ones that I put into the demon category are like, it takes a lot for me to put somebody or a thing into the demon category. But one of the areas that I really draw a hard line around is if the entity actually enters into your physical body. And so these beings, these borderline demon beings, because they really are out there wanting to manipulate and control you. And so, but if something happens and your energy gets dropped down, or you participate in an addicting behavior that changes your internal vibration, then the entity can come into your auric field and influence you with its narcissistic control things, because really what it's doing is it's feeding off of your emotional energy, so it's really bad, but they're not there 24/7. So you can be a really nice person until you have the entity there, and then you can become a jerk. Where I call it like a definite demon is if the being takes over the physical body. So in ghost terms, it would be considered, something like, you need an exorcism, because you are being possessed. And in those instances, these beings discount your autonomy and actually come into the physical body and take over control over you. And so to me, these guys are demons because they are awful, awful, awful. Would you call the last group that I talked about, these really narcissistic ones, demons? There have been a few that I would put really on the line. Not that they entered the physical body, but they were just nasty, nasty. And I don't work with demons. That is just not my thing. I will work with an entity attachment. I will work with a lot of stuff. But then there becomes a line where they are so sociopathic that it takes a different kind of intervention to address them. And so they could be that earlier group. And so, I don't know, maybe demon. But the cases of demons actually, or beings entering into the physical body, is actually pretty rare. I've only encountered, I'm going to say 3 instances, 2 for sure. And so here are these stories because they're really kind of interesting. And so I have a good friend who is a demonologist. And so I can't remember. It's the newer Russell Crowe movie where he's a priest and an exorcist. So I watched that movie and it reminded me of my friend so much because he just is like, get out of here, and he just is not affected by their energy. Anyway, so I had this lady call me and she was concerned because she really wasn't understanding what was going on, and she was having these weird experiences, and she would like look in the mirror, but it didn't look like her. And I'm thinking like, okay, a little crazy here. Until her entity presented itself to me. And it was it was just a nasty, like so nasty that I referred her to my friend. It was that nasty. And so, I referred her. I thought it was a done deal. Didn't really think about it. And then about 3 weeks later, I get this phone. And this woman, she was older. She seemed very meek. She seemed very frail. She seemed very afraid. Very afraid. So again, 3 weeks later, I get this phone call, and the voice on the phone said, "He never called me." And I was like, holy crap. And I was like, okay, because I knew exactly who it was. And I said, you know what? I'm going to hang up the phone and I'm going to call him up. And you do this stuff long enough and you have friends that do this kind of work, you can just have like these really off the wall conversations. And I got him on the phone and I'm like, hey, her entity called me up. I think you need to call. So that was kind of funny. I mean, in a really weird, I mean, it was a little scary. But this one was even like creepier. So I was working with this guy, and so he acknowledged working with a spirit. And the spirit was giving him information, and he was supposed to be getting all of these like psychic tools, except he would go talk to his friend, and the friend would end up with the psychic tool and not him. And he was really jealous and didn't understand why he wasn't getting all of this stuff. I mean, there was this big ego competition thing going on between himself and these other people that were his friends. And it was different. And finally, the spirit presented itself, and it was this woman. And she looked very nice. However, she was using, and I'm going to say sex. So the image that she showed me, and I'm going to try to make this as least graphic as I can, was that she was on her knees taking care of some business for him. How's that? And she was using that energy to control him. And so I asked him, was she doing X? And he confirmed that that's what she was doing. And I said, well, she's just doing that to keep you enticed and keep you lured in and keep you engaged in this whole thing. And he goes, well, but our contract ends on July 16th and stuff, whatever. And so I said, well, why don't we just hold off? Because he booked 3 sessions. So this was like session number 2 that I discerned her. And when we get to that last session, or you're done with your contract, we can meet again and we can kind of follow up on what's going on. And he said, great, that's fine. So in the last session, he was talking about that for some reason he went to the mall and he was there for like 8 hours, but didn't really remember like 4 hours of the time he was there. And he really didn't know why he was at the mall. And so when he's telling me this stuff, and it just, other than she's there. Oh, and in between session number 2 and session number 3, I talked to my friend, and he was like, she is trying to lure you in to take him on as a client so she can attach to you through your curiosity to him. And I called my friend because she gave me the creeps. Wolf in sheep's clothing. She looked just fine and kind of angelic, but the vibe that I got off of her was evil, evil, evil. Anyway, so I'm talking to him, and then all of a sudden I'm talking to this person, but she's referring to my client in third person. And I'm like, well, who's this? And she said, well, this is Angela. And so now Angela, the spirit, is having a direct conversation with me, talking about the guy. And so that was just weird and interesting. And so I said, well, maybe you can put him back on. And she put him back on, and he said, yeah, I'm standing over at my mirror and I don't know how I got here, and and he was basically having missing time. And I felt kind of bad about it, but I said, well, I was just having a whole conversation with Angela, and she was telling me all of this stuff. And, you're not remembering the time that Angela is kind of in charge over here, and you're not. And that was kind of where it got left. Very interesting case. Something that part of me really wanted to pursue. But then there was another part that it was like, you don't want to get messed up in that energy dynamic. You don't. Anyway, so I'm coming back to the question, are all ghosts demons? I don't think so, but perhaps the lack of understanding that many people have about what ghosts are, or the great array of beings or non-corporeal entities that live in dimensions that are outside of our awareness, if they had more understanding of this, then maybe their opinion of what demons are would change, or the nature of ghosts would change. So that's our topic for today. That is our topic for today. So before I kind of open up the lines, I just want to remind people that if they would like to schedule the private consultation with me, please, where's my thing? Please go to soulhealer.com. That's soulhealer.com, and drop me a line and we can set up a time for a private consultation. If you are watching this show on Substack or Rumble or BitChute or TikTok or wherever this is being posted, Spotify, and you want to join the live event, please go to my YouTube channel. And that is Just Energy Radio on YouTube. That's Just Energy Radio on YouTube, 7 p.m. Central. Click the live link and join the fun and get a free on-air psychic reading from me. I mean, unless you go to soulhealer.com and schedule a private consultation there. Okay, so here are the rules of engagement. If you would like to get a reading, put it in the chat. Hey, Dr. Rita, I would like to get, wait a minute. Hey, Dr. Rita, your hair looks amazing. I would like to get a reading. And then provide me with a number between 1 and 3. And that number is how many times I will shuffle the cards on your behalf and then pick a card to do the reading with. If you find that their line is really long, you can jump the line and be the next person in the queue by going to soulhealer.com/live. And there are 3 things you can do there. You can jump the line, which will move you up to the top. If you have a personal question you would like to ask, so I am just offering general readings. So if there's something burning in your heart and you need clarification on, ask Dr. Rita. You can do that at that location. And, you know, while you're there, if you're finding value in the topics that I'm talking about, or, you know, you get a really great reading, you can always go there and leave me a little something in the tip jar. All righty.